Can you hear me okay? Okay. All right, Revelation, last book of the Bible. How many chapters are there? 22. All right. If you take the first 3 chapters, chapters 1, 2, and 3, chapters 2 and 3 primarily deal with the 7 churches of Asia. In those 3 chapters, the word churches or church is mentioned 19 times. 19 is the number for faith. Hebrews chapter 11 lists 19 names. We call that the faith chapter. Those letters to the churches of Asia all have some significance, particularly the last 2 churches, the Church of Philadelphia and the Church of Laodicea. If anybody ever asks you, is the church going into the tribulation? The answer is yes and no. Because those 2 churches, the church at Philadelphia and the church at Laodicea, represent the true church and the false church. Philadelphia is the true church. When you read in Revelation chapter 3 about the church of Philadelphia, there's nothing negative said about that church. When the rapture comes, those true churches, those true believers are going to be raptured out. The church at Laodicea, there's nothing good said about them. As you read the last part of chapter 3, there's nothing good said about the church at Laodicea. They are representative of the false church. When the rapture comes, that church goes into the tribulation. So the Philadelphia church is raptured out. The Laodicean church stays. So if all the believers are raptured out, who is left? Lost people. So only lost people go into the tribulation. All the saved are gone, right? That's what the rapture is all about. The raptures take out God's people. So the church at Philadelphia, the true church, true believers, they're going to be gone. The church of Laodicea, false church, false believers, that would be, say, for example, Jehovah's Witness, the Mormons. I'm not saying there might be some saved people in those denominations, but by and large, those are false churches. So they will go into the tribulation period. All right. So first 3 chapters, take them off, set them aside. The last 3 chapters, chapters 20, 21, and 22, they all deal with end time. This morning I was in chapter 20. That was after the tribulation had ended. Satan has been bound. We're about to go into the millennium, the 1,000-year millennial reign. So basically what I'm saying is if you rip off the first 3 chapters and rip off the last 3 chapters, that's the tribulation period in between. So from chapter 4 to chapter 19, through chapter 19, that's the tribulation period. So what's going to happen during the tribulation period? Well, you have 4 sets of 7s that are going to take place. You're going to have the 7 seals. You're going to have the 7 trumpets. You're going to have the 7 plagues. And you're going to have the 7 vials of wrath. Okay? All that takes place between chapter 4 and chapter 19. Something happens at the end of chapter 3. If you're there, I want you to turn to chapter 4. After he talks to those 7 churches of Asia, something happens. Look at verse 1. Look at the first 2 words of chapter 4. Verse 1. After this. You see that? After this, John says, I beheld. Okay? So something happened at the end of chapter 3 and before chapter 4 begins. What do you think happened? Let me tell you this. The word church or churches is never mentioned between chapter 4 and chapter 19. So what happened? The church is gone, Mike. The church was raptured out at the end of chapter 3. So beginning chapter 4, John the Revelator, who wrote the book of Revelation, this is the Apostle John. He wrote 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John. He wrote the Gospel of John. So John wrote 5 books. He is the last remaining apostle that is alive. This book was written about 95 AD. It's written from the Isle of Patmos. John is about 95 years old. And when you read chapter 1, you find out why he is on the Isle of Patmos. He has been banished or exiled there because of preaching the Word of God. So at the end of chapter 3, after those 2 churches, Philadelphia and Laodicea, the rapture has taken place. The word church is never mentioned again until chapter 22. Okay? So keep in mind, 19 times the word church is mentioned in the first 3 chapters. It's only mentioned one more time, and that's in Revelation. Chapter 22. Okay, so in chapter 4, John says after this, I beheld, okay? And as you read chapter 4, you'll see the 24 elders sitting around the throne. That's you. That's the raptured saints. Those 24 elders are representative of the saints that were raptured out. And they're sitting around the throne worshiping God. In chapter 5, John is really downhearted because there is a scroll, which is basically God's last will and testament for the earth. There's a scroll and it's sealed by 7 seals. And John is discouraged because he says they searched everywhere and they could not find anybody who could open the seals until a strong angel comes on the scene and he tells John, weep not. We have found somebody who can open the seals. And John says, I looked and behold, there was a lamb as if it had been slain. Well, who do you think that was? By the way, the word lamb is capitalized in your King James Bible. So that is Jesus. So John sees Jesus as the lamb slain. I mentioned to you briefly this morning in chapter 6, you'll see the rider on the white horse. Now, that rider has some peculiarities associated with him. One of those peculiarities is that he has a bow, but no arrows. Now, who goes bow hunting without any arrows? And so that rider on the white horse is the devil. He's a false prophet, okay? So that's chapter 6. Chapter 7 begins those plagues that I mentioned earlier. You've got the opening of the 7 seals. And then you have the sounding of the 7 trumpets. And then you have the 7 plagues. And then you have the 7 vials of wrath. And as you read those, you'll find that, now keep in mind, who goes into the tribulation? The lost people. Because the saved are all taken out. And so during the tribulation, about 2/3 of the earth's population that remained die during the tribulation period. Read it. You'll find where a third die here, and a third die here, and a third die here. So a large portion of those people that go into the tribulation die during the tribulation. Now, here's a question that often comes up. Can anybody be saved during the tribulation? The answer is yes. Now, as I was growing up as a young preacher, I was in what's called the BMA, Baptist Missionary Association of Mississippi. And all the older preachers constantly preached on the fact that you cannot be saved during the tribulation. Well, I wrote an article one time, put in the paper that we had, and the title of the article was Salvation During the Tribulation. And when you read the book of Revelation, which a lot of the older preachers didn't want to read, much less preach from, because they were afraid they would misinterpret something. But during the tribulation, you will find that every kindred, nation, and tongue, there are people saved from every kindred, nation, and tongue. It says it right there. So there will be people saved, probably, I'm going to go out on a limb, probably as many or more saved during the tribulation as before the tribulation. Because when things get bad, that's when people turn to God. And things are going to be bad, really bad. The trees are going to burn up. The locusts are going to eat the leaves off the trees. The grass is going to burn up. The water is going to turn to blood. So, I mean, all kinds of terrible things are going to happen between chapter 4 and chapter 19. So, those, and I don't know if those are going to be sequential or simultaneous. Some people think it'll be sequentially. Some people think those will be simultaneous. I don't know. I don't know if anybody does. And by the way, let me say this. If anybody tells you they understand the book of Revelation completely, you need to put a big L on their forehead. You know what that means? They are a liar. Because nobody, I don't believe anybody understands it completely. So I'm just giving you a little thumbnail sketch of what little bit I know. So those various atrocities are going to take place during the tribulation. How long is the tribulation period going to last? 7 years. So if the rapture took place right now, we would know that the 1,000-year millennial reign is going to begin in 7 years. And the second coming of Jesus would be 1,007 years from right now, if the rapture took place right now. So from 4 to 19, horrendous things are going to happen on the earth. You get to the last 3 chapters, that's the end time. That's what I preached on today. Chapter 20 deals with the binding of Satan for that 1,000 years. During that time, there will be people saved because, how do I know this? Because, as we saw in chapter 20, Jerusalem is going to be surrounded. The city of the saints is going to be surrounded by Satan's forces. So where did those saints come from? They had to have come through the tribulation. Now, Isaiah talks about how a child might die at the age of 100. You say, well, how could they be a child and be 100 years old? Because the 1,000-year millennial reign is going to last 1,000 years. So during the 1,000-year millennial reign, it's possible for somebody to live to be 100 and die fairly young as a child. So you have where we are now. We are in the church age. What did Jesus say? I will be with you until when? The end of the age. He's talking about the church age. So when the church age comes to a close, it will come to a close at the rapture. The Philadelphia church, the saints, are going to be taken out. Only the lost go into the tribulation. At the end of the tribulation period, only saved people go into the 1,000-year millennial reign. All the lost die out. Only the saved go into the 1,000-year millennial reign. So during that 1,000 years, babies are going to be born. Some of them will live to be 100, and they'll die at the age of 100, some of them. But some will go all the way through. Adam lived to be 950. Methuselah lived to be 969. So it's happened before. If it's happened before, it can happen again. So only those saved people go into the 1,000-year millennial reign. But during that 1,000 years, you're going to have some people who believe in Jesus. You're going to have some people who do not. So over a span of 1,000 years, you're going to have two groups again. So that's why at the end of the tribulation and at the end of the 1,000-year millennial reign, there's going to be some saints, good people. There's going to be some bad people. The bad people are going to surround Jerusalem, following Satan, their leader, who's going to be defeated. And so as they surround Jerusalem, like I mentioned this morning, they're going to be annihilated. So in a nutshell, that's what Revelation deals with. You have the first 3 chapters dealing with the 7 churches of Asia. The last 3 chapters deal with the end time. And then in between is the 7-year tribulation period. And those years are going to be really, really bad, worse than anything you can imagine. John sees the Lamb. The Lamb begins to open those seals. The trumpets begin to blow. The plagues begin to take place. The vials, and by the way, a vial normally, Ms. Cochran, we think of like a blood vial, a test tube. No. These are bowls. These are bowls of wrath that are going to be spilled. So a horrendous period of time during the 7 years of the tribulation, and then you have the 1,000-year millennial reign. So if you take off the first 3 chapters and the last 3 chapters, what's left is the tribulation period. Only the lost people go into the tribulation. Only saved people come out of the tribulation. But during the 1,000-year millennial reign, you're going to have a reoccurrence of saved and lost, just like we have right now. So when Jesus comes back, that's what he's going to find. When they stand before the great white throne judgment, all the lost are going to be relegated to go to hell. All the saved are going to be ushered into heaven to spend eternity with him. So, does anybody have a question on Revelation? That's a real thumbnail sketch. But it's a little simpler if you can understand it in those 3 parts. The church age, the tribulation period, the 1,000-year millennial reign, and the end time. So just keep in mind, everything between 4 and 19 is bad. You don't want to be here. You don't want any friends to be here. And that's the reason we witness. Am I doing something? Yeah. That's the reason we witness to our friends and relatives, because we don't want them to go into the tribulation period. It's just going to be really, really bad. All the lost people that go into the tribulation are going to die. Some people are going to be saved during the tribulation. They will go into the 1,000-year millennial reign if they survive. You have to keep in mind, during the tribulation period, if a person does get saved, there's a good possibility they are going to be executed. I saw yesterday where in the Congo, 70 Christians were beheaded. And that is a lot of what's going to happen during the tribulation period. If they get saved, for one thing, it's going to be difficult to get food because you're not going to have the mark of the beast. Without the mark of the beast, you can't buy, you can't sell, so how are you going to live? People like Zach and his dad, good hunters, they may go out and get them some hogs. I understand there's plenty of them around. So, you might, there's some people that can survive that way, but most people can't. I mean, I get my beef in at Sam's. I get my fish at Walmart. I think I caught one fish in my life, and that was a gar. I threw him back. But anyway, so, I couldn't survive like that. I'm not a survivalist, but some people can, and they will survive during the tribulation period. But it's going to be tough. How are you going to pay your power bill? How are you going to buy gas for your car? How are you going to pay your house note when you don't have the mark of the beast? You can't do it. So they're going to lose everything that they've got, including a very good chance they'll lose their life during those 7 years. Anybody have a question? So you got Revelation down pat now. Rip off the first 3 chapters, deal with the 7 churches of Asia. Rip off the last 3 chapters, deal with end time. What's left is a 7-year period of tribulation. So it's not that hard to figure out if you keep it categorized into those areas. Okay? All right, that's my lesson for the day. All right, Zach.